In 1987, Israel was only one cabinet vote away from joining the world's elite jet-building powers. A billion-dollar project, years of engineering, and the promise of total air superiority, all in Israel's hands. But overnight, the dream vanished. The Lavi fighter had been built, it had flown, and then it was canceled by a single 12-11 decision. How did a nation so determined to control its destiny lose everything in a day? And what has been hidden behind that razor-thin vote ever since? In the late 1970s, Israel's Air Force faced a growing problem. The backbone of its fighter fleet, the A-4 Skyhawk and the Cancellation, was aging fast. Regional threats were evolving, and imported jets came with strings attached. Each new crisis reminded officials that foreign suppliers could delay upgrades, restrict modifications, or halt deliveries. For Israeli defense planners, relying on outside powers for the core of national security was a risk they could no longer afford. The answer, they believed, lay in operational sovereignty. If Israel could design, build, and control its own advanced fighter, no foreign government could dictate the terms of survival. This was not just about pride or prestige. It was about the ability to adapt quickly to local threats, update systems on Israel's timeline, and keep critical technologies out of the hands of potential adversaries. Every element from radar to flight controls would be tailored for the specific realities of flying and fighting in the Middle East. The push for independence grew stronger as the limitations of existing aircraft became clear. The Skyhawk, once the workhorse of the Air Force, was nearing the end of its service life. The Cancellation, an Israeli adaptation of a French design, offered more flexibility but still depended on foreign engines and restricted parts. Meanwhile, the pace of technological change in military aviation was accelerating. Without a new homegrown solution, Israel risked falling behind neighbors who were buying the latest American or Soviet fighters. The idea of a sovereign fighter program promised more than just a new airplane. It meant freedom to upgrade, freedom to export, and the chance to shape the future of Israeli air power without waiting for outside approval. Defense officials saw it as a way to close the gap between national ambition and national capability. The challenge would be immense, but the alternative, relying forever on the goodwill of other nations, was simply unacceptable. Inside the walls of Israel Aircraft Industries, the Lavi project became more than a military plan. It was a national wager on the future of Israeli industry. In 1980, the cabinet's green light did not just promise a new fighter jet, it promised thousands of jobs, a leap forward in engineering, and a chance for Israel's factories to match the world's aerospace giants. At its peak, the Lavi program employed over 4,000 engineers and technicians, drawing talent from universities, kibbutzim, and city neighborhoods. For many, working on the Lavi was not just a job, it was a mission. Young engineers fresh out of the Technion joined seasoned machinists who had built everything from buses to missiles. Families in Lod and Tel Aviv pinned their hopes on steady paychecks and the pride that came with building something few thought possible in such a small country. The government saw the Lavi as a springboard for the entire economy. Success would mean not just independence in the skies, but a new era for Israeli high-tech. Politicians spoke of the Lavi as a national project on par with the founding of the state or the launch of the first kibbutz. Israel Aircraft Industries leadership championed the program as a way to move Israel from an importer of technology to a creator. They imagined a future where Israeli-made jets could be exported around the world, bringing in revenue and prestige. The Lavi supply chain stretched across the country. Small subcontractors in Haifa and Be'er-Sheva tooled up for precision parts, while electronics firms in Petah Tikva raced to deliver cutting-edge avionics. Each new contract meant more apprentices, more overtime, and more investment in local skills. By 1983, even as inflation battered the economy, cabinet ministers defended the Lavi as a shield for Israeli jobs. The program's budget, initially set at $1.8 billion, was justified not just in defense terms, but as an investment in industrial maturity. For a generation of workers and engineers, the Lavi was proof that Israeli ambition could compete with the world's best, if only the country was willing to take the risk. On the factory floor at Israel Aircraft Industries, the Lavi began to take shape as something unmistakable in its design. Engineers gathered around blueprints that broke from tradition. Instead of copying the lines of American or Soviet jets, they sketched a compact fighter with a sharp, angular silhouette, a single engine nestled in a narrow fuselage, broad delta wings sweeping back, and small canard foreplanes set ahead of the main wings. The delta canard design wasn't just for looks. It promised exceptional agility at low speeds and in tight turns, qualities crucial for short runways and quick response missions that defined Israel's air doctrine. The Lavi's frame was built for flexibility. Its size kept it nimble and hard to spot, with proportions that made it look almost delicate beside the heavy, twin-engine fighters of the era. Every curve and angle was chosen to help the jet climb fast, roll sharply, and land safely, even on rugged strips. The single engine, sourced from Pratt & Whitney but built under Israeli license, offered a balance of power and efficiency, keeping maintenance simple and costs lower than the twin-engine giants. Beneath the skin, the structure relied on lightweight materials and tight tolerances, the result of years spent refining production techniques. The goal was a platform that could handle the stress of modern combat and also accept upgrades and modifications as technology advanced. For the engineers and machinists at Israel Aircraft Industries, every rivet and weld carried the weight of national expectation. The Lavi's form was more than a matter of aerodynamics. It was a statement that Israel could dream, design, and deliver on its own terms. Inside the Lavi's cockpit, Israeli engineers set their sights on a new frontier, digital brains, not just muscle. The vision was a fighter that could think, adapt, and help its pilot make sense of the chaos in modern air combat. Instead of the old maze of analog dials and switches, the Lavi's controls were built around integrated digital displays, putting radar, navigation, and weapons data together on clear, reconfigurable screens. This was not just a matter of convenience. It was about giving Israeli pilots the edge to process information faster than their adversaries and to tailor the jet's responses to the unique demands of local missions. At the heart of the project, system engineers worked on a fly-by-wire concept. Rather than relying on mechanical cables and pulleys, the Lavi's movements would be managed by computers, interpreting the pilot's commands and adjusting control surfaces in real time. This approach promised tighter handling, especially at low speeds and at high angles of attack, and made it possible to design a more agile, less stable airframe, one that could outmaneuver older jets. But it also meant taking on the challenge of writing and maintaining the software themselves, ensuring every line of code was under Israeli control. The ambition went beyond simply matching the F-16. By building their own avionics suite, Israeli engineers aimed to create a jet that could be upgraded on their own terms, without waiting for foreign approval. Every test in the lab and on the runway brought new lessons as teams worked to integrate sensors, warning systems, and flight aids into a single, unified digital core. The Lavi's electronic heart was as much a statement of independence as its distinctive silhouette, a promise that Israel would never again be left waiting for someone else's software update. On the last day of 1986, a white and blue jet rolled out onto the runway at Ben Gurion Airport. The Lavi, tail number B01, had moved from design sketches and factory floors to the open sky. Chief Test Pilot Menachem Shmuel climbed into the cockpit, surrounded by a small team of engineers and officials holding their breath. Engines roared to life. The jet accelerated, nose lifted, and the Lavi left the ground for the first time. Proof that Israel's billion-dollar gamble was more than a dream. In the control room, decades of ambition condensed into a single moment as the prototype circled above the airfield. The flight was brief and careful, reaching subsonic speeds, but every second in the air was a victory for the team that had spent years battling technical setbacks and doubts. In the months that followed, the Lavi prototypes began to rack up flight hours. By early 1987, a second airframe, B-02, was flying as well, each sortie testing new digital flight controls, avionics, and handling at high angles of attack. Pilots reported a jet that felt nimble and responsive, with fly-by-wire systems that smoothed out even the most aggressive maneuvers. Engineers pored over flight data, tweaking code and hardware after every landing. The Lavi's presence was no longer confined to blueprints or models. It had become a living, breathing aircraft. For a brief window, Israel stood on the edge of joining the world's most elite aviation powers with a homegrown fighter that could hold its own in the sky. As the Lavi prototypes took to the sky, applause from the factory floor collided with a growing storm outside. Headlines began to question the wisdom of pouring so many billions, much of it U.S. aid, into a jet that still had no production orders. Editorials in Israeli newspapers asked whether the country could afford another economic gamble, especially with inflation still haunting paychecks and the memory of budget crises fresh in public minds. The Lavi's maiden flights, intended as proof of progress, instead sparked a wave of scrutiny. Reporters pressed defense officials on cost overruns and shifting delivery dates. Talk radio hosts debated the risks of betting Israel's industrial future on a single project. In the Knesset, some lawmakers demanded public audits, while others warned that every shekel spent on the Lavi meant less for schools, hospitals, or border security. Doubts were not limited to cost. Military analysts began to question whether the Lavi would ever be more than a showpiece. Rumors swirled about export ambitions. Could Israel really sell the jet abroad? Or would U.S. licensing restrictions and competitive pressure from American manufacturers block those dreams? Foreign correspondents picked up the story, noting that Washington was watching closely. Reports surfaced that U.S. officials feared the Lavi might undercut F-16 sales in third countries, raising uncomfortable questions about the wisdom of bankrolling a potential rival. Inside Israel, the narrative was no longer one of unbroken progress. The Lavi had become a lightning rod for debate, a symbol of national ambition to some, a looming liability to others. Each new headline sharpened the divide, and the first cracks in the project's political armor began to show. Pressure built from every direction as the Lavi edged closer to reality. Inside government offices, finance ministry officials pored over budget ledgers, tracking a project that had started at $1.8 billion but was now swallowing 1/4 of all United States military aid to Israel. Each new estimate from the ministry painted a steeper climb. Unit costs had soared by more than 50%, with some projections warning the price could reach $50 million per jet if production numbers fell. For a country still recovering from runaway inflation, these numbers were impossible to ignore. The cost meter kept ticking upward. Every delay, every new technical hurdle, every reduction in planned orders made the program harder to defend. Military planners, especially within the Israeli Air Force, grew restless. Many officers respected the Lavi's ambition, but doubted whether it could ever deliver on its promise. They pointed to the F-16, already proven in combat and available through existing United States channels. Why spend billions reinventing a fighter when American jets could be bought off the shelf, ready to fly, and at a fraction of the cost? Internal studies compared the life cycle expenses of the Lavi and the F-16, and they often sided with the latter. Some accused the Air Force of bias, others saw pragmatic caution. Either way, the argument reached the Knesset floor. Was Israel risking its security and its economy on a dream? Beyond Israel's borders, the debate took on new urgency. In Washington, Reagan administration officials and members of Congress watched the Lavi with growing skepticism. Nearly 90% of the program's funding came from United States aid, yet the jet was shaping up to be a direct competitor to American models like the F-16 and the F-A-18. Concerns mounted that Israel, using American dollars and technology, would try to sell the Lavi on the international market, undercutting United States defense exports. Licenses for key components were delayed, and warnings filtered back through diplomatic channels. Continued support for the Lavi could jeopardize broader aid agreements. The pressure from Washington was clear. Washington would not bankroll a rival. Inside Israel, the three forces, ballooning costs, military skepticism, and external pressure, closed in. Each side dug in, with supporters touting independence and jobs, while critics warned of bankruptcy and lost alliances. The Lavi's fate was now a matter of national debate, with every day bringing the moment of decision closer. August 30th, 1987. In a cabinet room in Jerusalem, 24 ministers took their seats, each carrying the weight of years of ambition, billions in spending, and a nation's hopes for technological independence. The debate had stretched for months, but now every argument on cost, jobs, security, and foreign pressure narrowed to a single question: should Israel stop the Lavi project or see it through? Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, a steadfast supporter, believed he had secured enough votes to keep the project alive. Shimon Peres, foreign minister and chief opponent, worked the phones and the corridors up to the last moment, pressing his case that Israel could not afford to continue. The ministers were split along party lines, Labor against, Likud for, yet everyone knew the outcome would hinge on a handful of swing votes. Finance Minister Moshe Nissim, a member of Likud, crossed party lines. He sided with Labor, citing runaway costs and the risk to Israel's broader economy. Health Minister Shoshana Arbeli-Almoslino, under intense pressure from both sides, refused to be forced into a simple yes or no. She abstained, later describing the isolation and personal anguish of her decision. The meeting dragged on through heated exchanges and last-minute appeals. At one point, Peres confronted Arbeli-Almoslino directly, warning that a vote for the Lavi would be remembered as a victory for the opposition. She stood her ground, unmoved by party threats or promises. Defense Minister Moshe Ahrens, a champion of the Lavi, watched as the numbers shifted out of his favor. When the vote was finally called, the room fell silent. 12 ministers voted to cancel. 11 voted to continue, 1 abstained. The fate of Israel's largest weapons development effort was sealed by a single margin. Moshe Ahrens resigned in protest. The leaders of IAI warned of long-term damage to Israel's industrial base. Outside, workers gathered in disbelief as news spread. Overnight, a project that had consumed billions and promised a new era for Israeli industry was over, erased not by technical failure, but by the slimmest of political majorities. Israel's gamble on true aerospace independence ended with a single vote. Today, no nation builds a frontline fighter jet alone, and every project faces outside pressure and hard limits. As global competition over technology and sovereignty intensifies, the Lavi lesson is clear. The dream of self-reliance is always fragile, and every decision at the crossroads shapes a nation's future. What would you have chosen? Share your thoughts below.